Today we want to talk about purpose. So why purpose? Let me spend a couple of sentences on that maybe. Last year in Karizawa we talked about, amongst others, generations in the workplace and about how millennials that now coming more and more into the workplace have complete different sets of values and things that they aspire in their lives, and that potentially for these people titles and pure salary is not the only motivating factor that we have, and it's more about being in a company they feel they can have an impact or they can change something. For the older generations, there might be also that question that when you approach the second half of your life, am I actually doing the right thing? So you ask yourself, am I in the right place? Why am I doing what I'm doing? So this question of a why is something that is important for everyone in a personal life, but also in a business life. And I would like to try to dive a little bit into this. Today, in the best tradition of FUSO Talks, I would like to not spend time to talk about the Daimler approach, we will do that tomorrow, but would like to decipher what purpose actually is and what it means to people, and yeah, how is it related to happiness and maybe even effectiveness. And are there differences in the Western cultures, in the Eastern cultures, in Japanese culture, Indian culture, on how purpose is seen? So for this, I have 3 speakers today that will look at the topic from various angles. The first speaker comes from Copenhagen in Denmark. He's the CEO of the think tank that's called the Happiness Research Institute, beautiful name. And his name is Mike Viking. And my first question probably will be if this is an artist name, because put a Viking with a mic in the hand on the stage and call him Mike Viking, that's actually pretty cool, I thought. But anyway, we'll come to that. The Happiness Institute is not some kind of religious institute or community, but an organization that researches the sources of human happiness and consults nation leaders and companies on how to create social ecosystems that increase the quality of life. So give a warm welcome to Mike Viking. Thanks for being here. Our second speaker is, I think, something like a pop star in Japan. To everyone that I mentioned this name, and every Japanese colleague or friend said, "Oh my God, I know him." But unlike most pop stars, he's actually a neuroscientist, and he wrote his PhD about mathematical models of muscle contraction. That looks or sounds very, very impressive. He works as a senior researcher at the Sony Computer Science Laboratories, is a visiting professor at Tokyo University, has written numerous books with different topics that I can't mention all. But the one relevant for today is called The Little Book of Ikigai, The Secret of Japanese Way to Live Happy and Long Life. So I'm looking very much forward to have him here on stage. Warm welcome, Ken Mogi. Thank you for being here, please. Okay, our third speaker is Indian national, so concludes basically our panel of nationalities with a European, Japanese and an Indian. We are very balanced today. Shukla Bose had a corporate career that made her the managing director of a group of resorts from the Oberoi Group, which everyone knows is one of the most prestigious hotel groups in India. But then she decided to quit her job and do what was closer to her heart, which is running an NGO that gives poor children access to education. For her, purpose is not an abstract buzzword, but the base of her life story. A warm welcome, Shukla Bose. Thank you so much for coming, Shukla, please. Now, our topic today is purpose. How closely is purpose related to happiness? And I think you probably come to that also in your presentation.
I will, but I mean, it's, as I see it, it's an integral part of happiness. And actually, you had the very first happiness researcher, that was Aristotle. 2,000 years ago, he wrote about happiness, and he saw the good life as the meaningful life. So do people have a sense of purpose in life? So it's one of the 3 main pillars we focus on in our studies, in the surveys. That is a sense of purpose, but we can also see that dimension, that pillar, also affect the other dimensions we're interested in understanding. Mm-hmm. So it's an integral part.
Great. Well, then I think we should go into medias res, as you say, immediately, and give you the stage for your presentation.
Right.
Thank you, Mike Viking.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Florian. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be back in Tokyo, and it's a real honor to be on this stage. So, purpose is also a wide term, an umbrella term. So we also usually break that down into different components. We can ask people directly, do you have a sense of purpose? Do you have a sense of meaning in life? When you look back at the past and when you consider the future, do you think that's a positive view? And also, some people walk aimlessly through life. Do you believe that you're one of them? So that's one of the ways we can try to quantify and measure and break down purpose. So then we can start to see or ask questions like, which people experience a high level of purpose? And here we can use that annual measure from the Office of National Statistics in the UK that I mentioned before. So once every year, we have around 200,000 people in the UK ask questions around purpose. And we can see, and this actually comes a little bit back to what you talked about earlier, Florian, that when we look at age and purpose, it looks like there's a quite stable relationship with purpose in our 20s, in our 30s, 40s, and 50s. But then in our 60s and 70s, maybe we become better at start asking questions at what really matters in life, because we see a bump there for people across both genders in terms of an increase in the level of meaning and purpose, and then a rapid decline in our 80s. We can also see having connections, having relationships improves our level of purpose. So people who are married, people who are in relationships are on average happier, and they also have a stronger sense of purpose than people who are single and people who are divorced. We can see also what we do with our time also impacts our level of purpose. People who are students, people who take care of their home, their family, but people also who work have a higher level of purpose than people who are sick and people who are unemployed. Unfortunately, there is a global lack of purpose. If we look at Americans, only a quarter of them feel they have a strong sense of purpose in life. And that's unfortunate because, as I mentioned earlier, it's really strongly linked purpose with happiness. But we also see other benefits. We see people who have a strong sense of purpose are healthier, both physically and mentally. They earn more, they're more productive, and they're more satisfied with work. So if we look at health, there's a great study in the UK where 9,000 people have been followed over 8 years, 8.5 years, 10 months. And this group of people were on average 65 years. So when we follow them over almost a decade, unfortunately 1,500 of those people die. But then we can start to see who were those people in the beginning of the study. And of course, what predicts mortality levels are health choices. What kind of diet do we have? Do we exercise? Do we smoke? And so on. Also the health status in the beginning of the study. And those predicted mortality levels. But I think, interestingly, what also predicted mortality levels was a sense of purpose. So the stronger the sense of purpose, the lower the mortality rate. So purpose keeps people healthy. It adds life to years and years to life. We can also see mental health. If you have a strong sense of purpose, there is a reduced risk of developing different mental diseases, 2.4 less chance of developing Alzheimer's. Again, a study where we have followed people over time and controlled for different factors. Job satisfaction. This is from one of our studies. We've measured job satisfaction in more than 10,000 people across the Scandinavian countries, looking at factors like income, like colleagues, like influence, like purpose. And what we see is that purpose is the best predictor of job satisfaction in the Scandinavian employees. So for every level of sense of purpose we increase for people, we see also an increase in job satisfaction. That's the clearest correlation we could see across the data set. So for every point, we increase the level or sense of purpose. We increase the job satisfaction by 0.42. And we could also see that if we increase job satisfaction, we also increase life satisfaction. For every point of job satisfaction, we increase life satisfaction by 0.5 point, more for men than for women. But that also means combined, then if we increase the sense of purpose, we increase job satisfaction, and that again increases life satisfaction. We can also see when we look at middle-aged Americans and follow them over time, look at their income levels, look at their net worth. If we start out with thousands of people and look at their net worth, and then look at their net worth 9 years later, we would expect to find an increase in their net worth. You earn more money 9 years later, you have also saved up more, so your net worth should be more, and it is. But if we control for purpose, we can see those people we followed that had an increased level of purpose also made additional, or had additional net worth 9 years later. So even if you don't care about happiness, even if you don't care about health, both mental and physical, and even if you don't care about job satisfaction, that's fine, then be in it for the money, right? Improve sense of purpose in terms of improving net worth and income. And that brings me to the last point I wanted to shed some light on is, of course, then if purpose is so great, then what can we do to improve the level? And I think this is actually the most fundamental and most difficult question that all of us can try and solve, because it is difficult. I think it is super difficult to harvest a sense of purpose and to cultivate a sense of purpose. I think everybody would love to, but it's very difficult to order on Amazon. And I think one of the ways we can do that is to move a little bit away from the notion of the development or the link between the pursuit of happiness and turning it around into the happiness of pursuit. I think a lot of us are looking for happiness as the aim, but instead it makes good sense to look at happiness as a byproduct of something else. So from happiness or pursuit of happiness to happiness of pursuit. Seeing happiness as a byproduct of something else. And I think I'm gonna end there so we have time for questions, but I think the key message here is we can measure happiness, we can measure purpose, and we can actually do a lot to improve both dimensions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. This is interesting and surprising to a certain extent because there is a lot of data on these happiness researches. What I figured is I didn't see much about, let's say, less developed countries. Of course, you would assume that purpose and happiness is something that comes to mind, or that's a luxury that people have when, let's say, the basic needs are met. On the other hand, we all know when we travel into more exotic countries and go around, there's this common phenomenon that they come back and say, oh, I met this fisherman, he has a simple life, but he's so happy. So how much is this happiness related to material needs and basically the basic needs being fulfilled?
So material needs, money does matter. We can see that there is a relationship between life satisfaction and income. But I think the important point here is that the mechanism is being without money is a cause of unhappiness. So once you reach a certain threshold, additional income is not going to impact how we feel about our lives. So with money and happiness, the same with everything else, there's diminishing marginal return, right? The first piece of cake, great. Piece number 8, not so great, right? What people also care about when it comes to income is their relative income. So how much money do I make compared to my peer group, right? So that's also why you'll see people that might be poor in absolute terms, in universal terms, but if they are making, if they're the top 10% of the village, they might feel well off. And what people often care about is feeling respected. They care about their position in the social hierarchy. So that's what we see reflected. But you also mentioned that, yeah, a lot of the sort of wealthier countries, a lot of the data is driven from that. But equally, we see data from poorer countries showing the same results. And to me, that's also a great thing. And now we talked a little bit earlier. We have different cultural backgrounds in this room tonight. But I really enjoy talking with so many different people across the world about these questions. And the more I talk with people across the world, the more I see how similar we are. And that is also what we see in the data, that we might be German and Indian and Japanese and Danish, but we're first and foremost humans.
That's a good key point to introduce the next speaker. Ken Mogi, thank you for coming again.
Thank you.
Before I come to this question, maybe a little bit to your person. I said it in the beginning, to whomever I speak, everyone seems to know you. Maybe for the non-Japanese in the room, if you could quickly say what you have done, and not only related to Ikigai in the past years, and how you came to becoming a researcher at Sony Institute.
Right. I used to, I still do some television work, so probably that's why I am considered kind of a household name. Sony, it's interesting. Mr. Idei, he used to be the CEO of Sony, and I actually study the brain, mind-brain problem, consciousness, and one of the key concepts is qualia. Maybe you come across with this, qualia, sensory qualities like redness of red, and Mr. Idei kind of read an article on qualia, and he's tried to start a very top-level brand called Qualia in Sony, and that's how I kind of started to get involved in Sony research seriously. But so what I do at Sony is a very fundamental, basic research. So not so much applied work and so on. But yeah, I'm in a very interesting situation. Half industry, half university. Some media work and so on. Yeah.
And is your feeling that the perception of happiness or the perception of having a purpose is different in the Western and the Eastern world? So is there a specific Japanese way of happiness or ikigai?
I think it's quite actually different. You used to have, I guess many of you are actually, I don't know, atheists, I know this, intellectuals, but you used to have one God, right? And 10 commandments, and the purpose comes from the top. In Japan, we used to have 8 million gods. That's the Japanese Shinto philosophy. So the Japanese typically don't start from the assumption there's a grand vision of life. The Japanese tend to start from the assumption that each individual has his or her own agenda. And each of us are different, and so there's no unifying grand picture, so to speak, that would give you the purpose of life. So that's probably the single most important difference between the European and Japanese approach to purpose, I think.
Okay, I'm very curious of what you will tell us, so
Okay.
I would like to give you the stage and
All right, sure.
listen to you. Thank you, Ken Mogi.
Okay, hi. Oops. Yeah, Ikigai. It has been published in 30 countries, maybe not as much as the Hugo book. Recently, it was covered in CNN, so it's very interesting to see your book translated all over the world. And compared to, maybe you are familiar with these psychological concepts like flow, grit, and mindfulness. I think Ikigai occupies a very unique position because it is proactive, and also it deals with a wider spectrum of life. And it's related to wellness, creativity, quality of life, and anti-aging. Ikigai, briefly, is the purpose of life. What you get up in the morning for. So there are 5 pillars of Ikigai. Starting small, releasing yourself, harmony and sustainability, the joy of little things, and being in the here and now. I'm going to talk about 2 of these factors in this talk. Starting small. Now, I really think you should go to this restaurant. If you can get a reservation, maybe they can make a reservation for you. This is Skierashiro, and the master is the world oldest Michelin three-star chef at the age of 94. As you can see, Barack Obama was invited by Mr. Abe, on this summit talk. It is really, really excellent sushi restaurant. It's an epitome of Japanese cuisine. However, when Onojiro started this restaurant, his purpose was not to make the world's greatest sushi restaurant. He came from a very humble background. But the reason why he started the sushi restaurant was because it was the cheapest to open. Of course, there are many different kinds of sushi restaurants. So, some restaurants come with very rich and expensive furnishment. But sushi actually started as food stand, like something like a food truck in the Edo era. And so if you do not go fancy about these furnishments, you can start very cheap, when you start a sushi restaurant. So the only reason why Jiro Ono started a sushi restaurant was because he could afford it. Then started his long, process of climbing up the ladder. But at any stage, he only had one motto, which was to stick to these small things. Because I think, it's the same for you guys too. If you want to make a great product, you've got to stick to small things. Otherwise, you cannot start anything, right? So that's starting small. The joy of little things. This is where I put some spice to my talk. Welcome to Japan. Small wrestling. Well, it's not about two fat guys bumping into each other, right? Well, it is about two fat guys bumping into each other. But we have something a lot more about that. Now, there are 10 ranks in sumo. The top rank, as you may know, is a yokozuna. However, there's another side of the story, As I said, only 10% of the sumo wrestlers make it to the top, few divisions where you can make a decent living. Most of them end up, as losers. If you're good, you climb up to the yokozuna. But if you're not, if you're a loser, you can also stay in the world of sumo. So in sumo, one is not forced to quit, how weak one may be. So there's no system where you are recommended to quit, even if you have won only 2 matches out of 132. So the joy of little things makes one carry on. There's no strict star system in the world of sumo. Of course there is a star system, but even the non-stars have something to carry on. That is ikigai, right? Now, nowadays we talk a lot about intelligence because it's the single important aspect of our life today. Traditionally, intelligence has been approached statistically, like in the Spearman's G factor. Spearman was a psychologist who developed this technique of doing factor analysis to analyze people's different abilities. And he came up with this idea of G factor, which is a kind of common denominator of different aspects of human intelligence. Neuroscience has found that activities in the prefrontal area correlates with this G factor. Now, there are different approaches of thinking. One is a rule-based specific thinking, and the other is what we call common sense, which is very ambiguous. Now, what we call neurotypical people, or in other words, normal people, they tend to be not so good at rule-based thinking, but they are very good at applying common sense. On the other hand, there are the so-called geeks and autistic savants. They are not so good at applying common sense, Maybe in this country there are some geeks, I'm sure. And artificial intelligence is actually, interestingly, developing as super geeks. They are not so good at common sense, but they are very good at applying rule-based thinking. So as I said, my lifelong goal is to understand how consciousness evolved in the brain. And interestingly, the way artificial intelligence is going now is different from the way brains evolved. It's going toward this supposedly, very strange singularity point, right? But it's going there through this application, rigorous application of rule-based thinking, whereas consciousness is more concerned with common sense and intuition. I'm sure you guys are really intelligent, but give it up. We cannot win this race to be more intelligent with the artificial intelligence, right? So I think in the coming years, there will be less focus on intelligence compared to personality. Personality is becoming more important because personality is about resource management. How you allocate your resources in your daily life, in the life-work balance. Pure intelligence can be ported out to artificial intelligence. So in the era of artificial intelligence, unique personalities are becoming more important, and social sensitivity between unique individuals would enhance team performance as well as create buzz. Now I'm coming to the final part of my talk, and I will touch on some examples from Japanese companies. Toyota, yeah, I once visited Toyota factory. It was the so-called internet bubble era in Japan. And many people were trying to win millions of dollars from a single idea. When I went to Toyota, the culture was totally different. Anybody from junior high school graduates to PhD, each of them could make a proposal to improve the so-called Toyota production system. But the compensation for a single proposal was something like $50, 50 US dollars. Nothing more, nothing less. What was amazing was Toyota employees were totally happy with it. No, they were not trying to make millions out of this excellent proposal, just $50. Because in Toyota, there was no star system. And when I'm saying this, I'm really stating the truth. Nobody is a star. Everybody is equal. Finally, I come to the example of Hoshino Resorts, one of the very uprising hotel and resort chain in Japan. Here, employees are encouraged to make their own decisions. They are autonomous. Mr. Hoshino, CEO and founder of Hoshino Resorts, once mentioned to me that when you delegate, you encourage people to make his or her own decisions, they feel such a pleasure. Why? Because in the brain, dopamine, the single important reward molecule in the brain, is a combination of reward and action. Unless you do something by yourself, you cannot really feel the joy. If your boss orders you to do something and you obey and the result is successful, you get some pleasure, but not so much dopamine is released. So my final comment to sum up, it is very important to do it and reinforce it. Reinforcement learning is something happening in the brain. And you can start small, like Mr. Onojiro of Sukiyabashiro sushi restaurant. And most importantly, you can do it together. As I said, social sensitivity is a single important aspect of teamwork, right? We are all different. We are all different. However, we have to be sensitive to each other. Otherwise, we cannot make great work. So that's my talk, and if you have any questions, please send emails to this address. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ken, for this really interesting and lively talk. If I understand your last comment right, or your summary, then you would say that purpose can only happen in social systems, in a group.
Yeah.
You cannot find your purpose alone.
I think because that's, as I explained, that's the traditional Japanese approach to purpose. And also, increasingly, because of this network theory, social approach in cognitive science and neuroscience, I think more and more researchers and practitioners are coming to this realization that purpose is actually a social construct. It's not something that would come from top down. I suspect even the 10 Commandments actually was a social construct at that age, originally. So, yeah, I strongly believe that purpose is a social construct.
I have an interesting question from the team, because to be honest, start small and enjoy the small things, and then develop from there is a very humble and also maybe Japanese culture influence topic. If we look over the ocean towards the Americans, then they would probably start with think big and be as ambitious as you can, and then you create purpose. I mean, Elon Musk doesn't do it below saving the world with electric cars or sending missiles to Mars. Would you say that big ambitions basically kill a sense of purpose, or isn't that another approach that works as well?
I think that's a very interesting question. But I suspect that even in the case of Mr. Musk, I think it probably was the joy of small things that carried him all the way to here. So if you think what kind of youth Elon Musk was, I'm pretty sure at some stage at least, he had to start from small things and enjoy small pleasures. And even today, maybe, if you break down the job as a great CEO or a great manager, I think even if you have these grand visions, in reality, you have to, rely on these small joys. Otherwise, you cannot, carry on, I think. It's not sustainable, I think.
I think that's, for me, the point where I would like to lead to our third speaker, Shukla. All this is very much experience-based and based on lots of data and looking into many people's. I
invited you because I found your story interesting as not an average analysis of happiness or purpose, but as someone who can probably tell us and share a little bit how your life took you. You had a corporate career and at some point in time decided to give that up in order to do what you felt your calling was. We will come to that a little later, but first, the first unusual thing is that as an Indian woman, you started a corporate career and became a CEO level. So what drove you to start this corporate career? What brought you to do that?
It's a natural progression. I went to university, I did my MBA, and it was expected of me to get into business. I've always been a little different, I'll talk about it. Therefore, but because I've always been very passionate about what I do, I put 100%. I kind of rose in my career pretty fast, and I reached the CEO position quite early. It was in a state of high. You feel good. I was happy, but the difference was I was not joyful. And today, with the kind of work that I do, I have discovered joy. And there is a difference between happiness and joy.
So would you say that today you are happy and joyful in your life?
Oh, totally. My children, when I get up in the morning, slightly stressed out, because it is stressful to arrange funds to run the organization. I get up with a headache. All I have to do is go to school, and the children come running to me, hug me, and my headache disappears. My children are my vitamin pills.
Okay, then I would love to hear more about this in your organization. Please, welcome on stage, Shukla Bose.
Good evening. I'm extremely honored and humbled to be invited to speak to you today. So, what I'm going to talk to you about is share little bits of my journey of crossovers. I've crossed over boundaries and to find my purpose and see if it resonates with you. I broke stereotypes even before I was born. My grandmother married at the age of 10. My mother married at the age of 14. My mother had 5 miscarriages before I was born. So when I was born, it didn't matter to her that I was a girl or a boy. She just wanted me to survive. And I'm talking about a culture and days where even today, 0.7 million children are killed just because they were born a girl. So this feeling of being wanted made a lot of difference to me. And nothing stopped me. I never felt inadequate in any way. I wasn't ever apologetic for being born a girl. And that continued. Here is a very, very faded photograph. It shows my age, that of my father. He would take me to work every day before he dropped me to school because he was so proud of me. And that didn't change even when my brother was born a year later. And nobody was surprised that whenever my brother and I would play imaginary games, I was always Tarzan and he was always Jane. So I was the only girl in my MBA class. I became a CEO fairly young, and I was one of those very few Indian women CEOs at that time. Thankfully, that is changing in India. There are a lot more women CEOs today, but clearly not enough. So actually, what happened was, I began to get a lot of awards. Entrepreneur of the Year award. I got a Woman of the Year award, and I was the CEO of a multinational company looking after South Asia, Middle East, China. So in many sense, I had arrived. Even I thought I had. It was only, there was something nagging in me, and I began to do something quite bizarre, actually. I began to write my own obituary. And I seriously advise that you all should try and do that. So when I was writing my own obituary, I realized that I didn't have much to write. I hadn't changed people's lives. I hadn't brought any meaning. And it was then that I decided that I needed to do something more. And I quit my corporate life of 26 years. I actually, I had worked and volunteered, and when I was a student in college and university, I had volunteered with Mother Teresa for 7 years. I would work with her in Shishu Bhavan, where we would collect little babies, abandoned babies, especially girls, and find homes for them. I worked in Nirmal Hriday, where we would find abandoned, destitute beggars and bring them and nurse them to health. Most of them actually died. And I was therefore not scared of working with the grassroots at the bottom of the pyramid. I began parikrama. Parikrama is a Sanskrit word which means a circle. For us, it's the circle of life that we are trying to complete in our children's lives. I started parikrama from my kitchen table with my own life savings that I had kept aside for my old age and my daughter's education. And that's how I began. And while I was looking around, of trying to, find myself, discover what I wanted to do, I realized that there's a difference between feeling powerful and being empowered. Many of us get caught into what others think of us. And real empowerment is when you're able to shift the energy from the physical to the insightful. Powerful is being confined to yourself. Empowered is the ability to influence others. I also realized that, money can buy joy, buy you a bed but not sleep, a house but not a home, and a companion but not a friend. This kind of understanding actually was a huge shift for me, because earlier I would drive a Mercedes car. I had to give that up, and I bought a small Indian car. Many of my friends who would, invite me for parties those days would feel sorry for me and say, you can borrow a car anytime. And I would say, hang on, the kind of work that I'm doing, even this little car will not enter the little lanes. I need a bicycle. And that's the change. What I realized that what I would spend on a pair of shoes can take care of a family of 5 for 1 whole year. That's gross misjustice. That's social inequity that needed something, we needed to do something about it. I felt, enough of talking about it. I needed to get my hands dirty. I needed to do myself. When I worked with Mother Teresa, there were a couple of things that I really learned from her. Many a times in interviews I've been asked, who was the best employer that you worked for? I always say Mother Teresa. Although she never employed me, I volunteered with her. But which CEO can have such dedicated workforce working for nothing? Which CEO can open 137 branches within 3 years all across the world and not have to pay anything, not have a business plan, but just a calling of the heart? And she would say, if you can't do great things, this is related to what you've just said, Ken. If you can't do great things, do little things with great love. If you can't do them with great love, do it with little love. If you can't do them with little love, do them anyway, because love grows when people serve. So having looked around all this, I decided enough. I quit my corporate career. I started Parikrama with just 165 children on a rooftop in midst of the slum, with 11 staff members. The 165 children are now grown up to 2,000. And this is against in backdrop where there are 21 million children out of school, 17 million children not in child labor. By 2020, it is projected that about 160 million students will be looking for jobs, but 84% will be unemployable. That is the statistics that come out from the Ministry of Human Resources. And that is because the government system of education is not working, where there's 69% dropout by grade 8 and 39% dropout by grade 10. Against this backdrop, just 165 children was nothing, but that's how I began. And I'm very proud to say that of the 11 staff members that I began with, 10 are still with me. 15 years. They work because they believe in the cause. So now I have 4 schools and a junior college, 2,000 children from 100 slums. I have 96% attendance, which is the highest in the country. Less than 1% dropout, which is the lowest in the country. 90% of my children are going to universities. We have an education transformation center, and we're training teachers of 500 government schools. We are impacting 63,000 children. 400 of my alumni are in universities. We sponsor them. And 100% of my alumni are 100% employable. And we are influencing their families as well. How is this happening? It's happening because of a model. It's the 360-degree model. We say, how can children do well in studies if they are hungry? So we give them breakfast, give them lunch, we give them a glass of malt and snacks. 88% of the calorie requirement is in the school itself, and we take care of their health. 98% of my fathers are alcoholics. 92% of my children have someone in their family in jail. So we're not talking about just poverty, we're talking about dysfunctionality. And with these children, what are we doing? We are creating new world citizens. So my appeal to you, this hall, men and women of character, there is a purpose in life. The purpose of life is to be happy. The purpose of life is to make others happy. The purpose of life is to create a happy world. Thank you so much.
Thank all of you for being here, sharing your insights on happiness and purpose. And yeah, thank you for being at FUSO Talks.
Thank you.